Oh, hello there. Yes, well, we've arrived at what the French call le Saturday et le Sunday. Indeed. Weekend, I suppose. Yes. Odd, I never knew that weekend was a French word. There you go. Yes, anyway, today I thought we'd have a quick look at one of those odd things that you get in that very odd place, the Express. Might well be discussing about the very nature of the walking dinosaur that is the Express, but I thought it was a particular piece of commentariat that was very, very indicative of the kind of absolute rubbish that we have to put up with, that demands that we think about things in a particular way if they are X, and then demands that we don't think about particular things if they are Y. One might think of recent stories about people burning Qurans outside embassies and then getting upset that they get attacked. I mean, yeah, it's like you can't throw a pig's head at a mosque without people getting upset. Whatever happened to free speech, eh? Anyway, here we go. Labour's ideological addiction to the state is leaving British economy in a turmoil. The public sector is a mess, despite one of the most popular myths about its failings being smashed to pieces. Yes. Now, already we end up with some really choice words about ideology and myths, which we'll go into naturally. So let's have a look and see what old Leo boy has got to say. One of the cherished pillars of conventional left-wing wisdom has just been comprehensively demolished. Yes, indeed, they've discovered that Karl Marx actually has a hidden bit of writing where he says, actually, it was all a laugh. No, not that one. Obviously not. You notice the way that this is written, okay? It's going to lead you down a particular path which isn't actually true. For years, a noisy alliance of campaigners, politicians and trade unionists have argued that the public sector's failings are due to chronic staff shortages and underfunding. Yes, you can see the direction of travel there. According to this fashionable analysis, where's it fashionable? Yes, you see, it's one of those great things whereby you get to be a trendy lefty person, even when it isn't trendy, yes. The only way to reverse the decline is to pump more money into the state and expand its workforce. Yeah, again, a direction of travel very, very, very well signposted, but such claims are largely a myth. This week, new official figures for the NHS expose the emptiness of this wailing propaganda about lack of resources, in quotes, you notice. Quoted from whom? Well, from Leo, yes, obviously. Now, this is where it starts to get really interesting. I want you to pay particular attention to the use of dates here, okay? Far from suffering cutbacks, the Department of Health's budget has gone up since 2019 by a whopping 31.5 billion to a total of over 191 billion. Yes, now you might ask yourself, where exactly was that from 2019? Could it be that there was an election? Might leave that one hanging for you to ponder, right? At the same time, the number of employees in the healthcare system has now passed 2 million, with over 313,000 new posts created during the same period. Compared to 5 years ago, there are 25% more doctors and nurses. Yes, okay then. So we've ended up with a situation where 2019, loads of money, loads and loads of money, which I'm not going to discuss. And then 2019 plus, there has been a huge amount of money, and there's been an increase. But one might say, okay then, but has there been a particular change in other circumstances which might lead you to think that you might need more doctors and nurses? Hint, something to do with the readership of the Daily Express, or indeed Leo himself, yes. Yet, the NHS is sliding deeper into crisis. The treatment of patients on trolleys is a symbol of an overstretched system that is unable to cope. Yes, odd that, isn't it? That we've got all that extra money and all those extra peoples, and yet there's still a problem, despite the increase in its headcount. In fact, the boost in funding and staff has been accompanied by a drastic fall in productivity, down by 19% since the epidemic. Yes, indeed. But again, is that specifically due to the extra number of people, or is it due to other reasons? You see, decline in productivity could be for a number of reasons. If you decide to work me for 4 hours a day, I might well be quite productive. If you decide to work me for 10 hours a day, you're likely to see a decline in my productivity per hour. Hint, 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 eh? No, I don't think Leo really means that. Of course, but he's not going to think about other things because that wouldn't be a fair game, would it? No. We are paying more into the NHS and getting less in return. Yes, I think people are very aware of that. The explanation, here we go, lies in poor management. A reluctance to embrace new technology. Outdated working practices, natural leak, an inflexible centralised command structure, and misguided priorities like the fashionable, there we go again, obsession with diversity, yes. Now, one of the things that I would find slightly odd is we are only but, 7 months into a new Labour government. So all of that stuff is very, very firmly at the door of the previous Conservative administration, who, don't forget, insisted that we had to have X, Y and Z. We couldn't pay for W, Q and T because there was no money. And we couldn't update things because, there's all that deficit to go with, which magically didn't disappear in 2015. You can see where I'm coming from here. Plus, of course, we do have what we call an ageing group of people. Again, Daily Express readers. So the demand, in particular with things like social care on the NHS, has increased enormously. And, drum roll, that all of those very unfashionable ideas like we've had for the last 15 years don't seem to have addressed it at all, like the internal marketplace. And again, we'll come to that one. Throughout the public sector, this is the same story of dwindling output along with workforce expansion. Yes, and again, I'm going to point you to the same notions here. Contrary to the endless moans about classroom shortages, there are now 469,000 teachers in our schools. Okay, compared to when? Right? 27,300 more than in 2010. Okay, right, yes. Just to dive in there, right? Okay, with that one. Now, in 2010, the definition of what a teacher was changed under the Conservatives to no longer mean people who are actually trained teachers. That might have something to do with it, in terms of, market deregulation. Yeah, that inflexible workforce thing, right? Okay? Just as the total of police officers at 170,000 is a tenth higher than in 2003. Oh, why 2003? Why haven't we also got that as 2010? Well, because we're being very, very picky with our numbers here in order to construct an argument, and hopefully you, being a doddery old git who's relying on the NHS to keep you alive for a bit longer whilst you clutch your Daily Express, and again we will come back to that as a concept, alive for a bit longer. Similarly, the number of social workers is up 15% over the last 5 years. Oh, not 2003 or 2017 or indeed 2010, but suddenly it's the last 5 years. Why? Because speaking as somebody who works in special needs education, knows this full well. Back in 2010, that one again, the number of social workers was slashed enormously by our previous government, wasn't it? Yes, which is why we have to put that up as the last 5 years, because they suddenly realised that having basically sacked everybody, that nothing worked properly. A bit like the NHS, isn't it? Yes. Whilst the number of academic staff in the universities has gone up from 217,000 to 240,000 since 2019. Yes. Why? Well, because the number of people who are employed on part-time contracts in the academic sector, including non-zero contracts and really appalling working conditions, has also greatly increased. But again, Leo won't tell you that. I do, don't I? Anyway, coming close to the end here, yet instead of making institutions more efficient, the staffing increases have achieved the opposite. No, they haven't. There is no particular proof of that in the numbers that he's put out, because of course he is just fixating on the number of people. And like I said about working extra hours, that isn't the way that real life works. This week's data from the ONS shows the state payroll has grown by more than 500,000 since the pandemic. Okay, but productivity is down by almost a tenth, yes. And again, why? It isn't necessarily that people aren't working hard or harder, is it? It could be a wide variety of other things. Indeed, workforce growth has fed an indulgent, inward-looking culture which elevates staff rights above public needs. apropos of nothing, of course, because anyone that doesn't work in the private sector, which incidentally doesn't these days include an awful lot of people who are like teachers and doctors and everything else, because so much is outsourced to private company. I work in the private sector and I'm a teacher. Still, Leo won't tell you that because it doesn't fit into his ideological position. As a result, waste and duplication are rife. Okay, Whitehall's payroll has gone up by almost 100,000 since 2016. Okay, why? But on social media forums, some officials are honest enough to admit they have very few real duties. Oh, okay then, Leo. Let's see you give us some proof then. I barely have any work to do and I don't feel challenged at all, said one contributor last month. Right. There you go. There you go, folks. There you got it. The proof. A bloke wrote something, no idea where that was, but never mind. As an ex-Labour minister, Lord Digby Jones declared in 2009, yeah, quite a while ago, that frankly the job of the civil service could be done with half as many people. Okay, but that's just as true today. Oh, okay then. Well, let's just have half the number of people then. Because we basically arrived at that before, we got to the 2019 election when suddenly the Conservatives realised that they better do various things because nothing worked. And as I always do, I will strongly say to you, do you remember the last time you had to get a passport and how long you had to wait? Yes, that's because it was outsourced. Still, that's the efficiency of the private sector for you, wasn't it? Yes, they get lots of money on government contracts and then, well, don't do anything. Remind you of anyone? Remind you of water? Remind you of rail? No, that would be me, professing fashionable left-wing ideas, wouldn't it? That would be an ideology, that would. Untested by market competition, much of the public sector is flabby and ill-disciplined. Oh, God, yeah. Like me, I'm flabby and ill-disciplined. Hooray! As revealed in the excessive rates of absenteeism, the attachment to strikes and the sense of entitlement of working from home, even when the type of job may make such a practice unsuitable. Yes, like me, I do work a lot from home because of the nature of the work that I do. High rates of absenteeism? Not in my case it wasn't, but a lot of teachers in schools obviously are, subjected to vast amounts of disease vectors that are children that basically cough on them all day long in very warm, wet, disgusting classrooms, makes them ill. That's the reason they have time off. The attachment to strikes, yes indeed, and I, as indeed as so many other teachers with 25 years worth of experience, have been on strike twice. Enormously high rate of strikes. No wonder nothing works when I've taken off, 2 days in a decade. What a git I am. Anyway, yeah. That is certainly the case when John Tuckett, the government preferred candidate to head the government's preferred candidate to head the Independent Inspectorate of Borders. And here we get to the God. I hope that you haven't realised what the problem with this is. For the last 5 years, Tuckett has been the official Immigration Services Commissioner, a post he's held despite living in Finland. Yes, he was appointed under the Conservatives, and they allowed him to work from home in Finland. The new incoming Labour administration have ordered him to come back. Oh dear, doesn't quite fit. Not going to mention it. It was an extraordinary arrangement for such a sensitive role. During the First World War, many Allied generals are heavily criticised for basing their staff offices in French chateaux far from the Western Front. But at least, in contrast to Tuckett, they were in the same country. Yes, indeed, Leo. I wonder where you are, because your Wikipedia page suggests that you actually have a home in Provence. I hope you didn't write it there. Ooh, how slack. The bloated public sector is not just failing to deliver value for money, but by its heavy burden, it's also dragging down the British economy. But Labour, with their links to the unions and ideological faith in the state, have given little indication they recognise the need for change. Yes, indeed. Now, what I'm going to do is be a complete git, as you may notice, and I'm going to suggest enormously to the writer of this piece that there are huge problems in what he's saying. Not the least of which is being very, very picky about dates and ignoring any other potential reasons why it is that productivity is so low. You may recall that under Jeremy Hunt, the NHS decided to save £9.50 by not upgrading its computer systems, and therefore was heavily affected when its XP systems got heavily infected. Do you remember that? Yeah, we're not going to spend any money, and oddly it came back to bite us. Well, that's exactly what we have with the NHS, and indeed with crumbling schools, and indeed everything else. Because when you decide that you can just get away with half the people doing a job, there's a good chance you just end up with half the job. Now, in relation to Leo, in terms of very, very bad working practices that don't seem to be working because of demographic issues, I will point him to this particular chart, which is circulation of newspapers, legacy media, right? Okay. Now, if we look at the Daily Express in Jan 2000, right? Okay, which was 25 years ago, it had an average circulation of just over 1 million, right? 2010, that had dropped to 674,000, and 2020, that had dropped to 296,000. The Daily Express currently and the Sunday Express currently are losing 18% of their entire readership every year. Now, those maths fans amongst you might be able to figure out why that is, but I think the reason it is because their commentator writers are basically not realising that they're working in an outdated industry and need to up their game. I mean, what exactly is Mr. Provence doing to improve his own productivity? Because obviously he's working for a failed enterprise that just isn't run properly. Why isn't he doing more? I want him to get off his particular little perch in some sun-drenched French valley and actually come here and roll up his sleeves and get on with it. It's no wonder the Daily Express is going down the pan, is it? Or is that just a bit harsh of me? Yes, probably. After all, it's events outside his control, unlike the teachers and the doctors and the social workers and the police officers who are all gits. Anyway, do have a glorious, glorious day. Oh, it's going to be a fun weekend. I'm travelling up north, hooray, to the joys of Yorkshire. So if you do see a video posted for me early next week, which appears not to be ignoring a major news story like nuclear Armageddon, that's the reason. Do have a lovely one. Do enjoy it. Yeah, wherever you may be. Provence. Oh, delicious and delightful and de-lovely, eh?